I've spent a lot of my life protecting the perception of me. So it's hard. Yeah. And you may have noticed that the picture that I put on my very first intro video for Hermanas is a picture of myself as a little girl. And the reason why I picked that picture is because I want little versions of myself to be able to pull up Hermanas and see a clip about something that's relevant to them in their lives today that maybe they don't have support on, and they can find resources and use it. Maybe hear a story that they can relate to and feel seen. Maybe be connected to a program or a different way of life that could maybe bring them more happiness. That includes fitness with Stephanie. That includes financial literacy, home ownership, picking a good partner, management advice, a makeup artist or an esthetician that can teach you how to take care of your skin and feel your best so that you can show up to these meetings and these rooms and these jobs. Then on a micro level, you can stand up to these harmful rhetorics that we see out in the world today. We tried to record this on Tuesday, but it was too emotional. I think it was the first time I'd ever talked about some of these things outside of a therapy office or some close friends. I don't want this podcast to be void of emotion, but I do still want to be able to articulate what I want to. And sometimes when I'm in my feels, I can't get to the point. So maybe one day we'll release Tuesday's video, and that teaser for today's episode will live on the internet forever, but I just wanted to redo it, get a fresh start. This episode will be a little bit about me and where this passion project came from and what I hope to do with it in the future. I want to make it very clear that my parents are my biggest heroes. My parents are everything to me, even when things are heavy or things were hard. I know that my parents are coming from a place of love, from great intention, and honestly, they too were in survival mode, and we still work on it every single day. And so I just want to make that very clear. I love my parents. They were doing the best that they can, just like all of us. I'll explain a little bit of my upbringing. So I'm going to have my parents on to talk about their immigration story and what everything was like for them before I was born in my early years that I don't remember. But I want to highlight it because it does make sense to explain it for who I am today. My family comes from a small village in Jalisco, Mexico, called Zacatongo. Some of you might have seen it. It's on my Instagram. I love it there. It really is a village. There's about 200 people that live there. And yeah, it's a lot of ranchers. It's people that live off of the land. El rancho, as they say. And my mom's from Zacatongo, a small village of 200. And then my dad is about a 45-minute horse ride up a mountain to an even smaller village that had about 10 to 20 people when he was growing up. They grew up in that area, and I can't wait to have them on so they can talk to you about it and we can go into more detail about it. But they grew up there, and I remember my dad telling me when I was little that it was better to be poor in the United States than to be poor there, just because it was more opportunity. And so my father decided to immigrate to the United States when he was in his 20s, I think like 21. So he came way before even with my mom, before even I was anything, a speck in his imagination. And his main objective was that he wanted to make enough money to buy a truck to go back and help on the farm. A few months after he got to the States, his father passed away. And he'd spent so much money and so much time to get to the United States and his dad didn't want him to throw that away and go back, that he asked his brothers if they could just not tell him for a little while so that he could stay there and not make a rash decision. Which, again, that's part of his story, and I yeah, hopefully he shares that with you and we can go into more detail. But then he decided to stay. And yeah, my father then lived here for a while. He then went back to Mexico, met my mom, and brought her over, and then petitioned for her to stay. And so, anyway, they, just as much as I, if not even more, were in survival mode themselves. Like, they came from poverty, but they were also rich in culture and family and love, and there was so much that they were leaving behind. It wasn't like they were seeking asylum or running away from like terrible violent things like some other people do. So that is a privilege for us, that they just wanted a better life, and so they came to this country. In doing so, I want to put it into context. My mom was 25, 26 when she came to this country, and she was newly married. She became pregnant really quickly, and then was navigating life without her family. She comes from a family of 10 plus her parents. My dad had already gone through all of that, but anyway, so new country, new systems, new language, everything is new. And so inevitably, I think that was really hard on her. And when I turned 2, because I was born in California, then when I turned 2, we moved to St. George, Utah, because her aunt lived here and there was a lot of work available out here. I think at the time we were anywhere from 7 to 8% of the population here in southern Utah. And my dad was a hard worker, and he just wanted to find something that was more sustainable and find a job and stay at it for 30 years, which he did end up doing, luckily. So they came to St. George, and the first 5 years of my life was just in Spanish. We lived on Dixie Downs. We lived in a couple of apartments, and then finally on Dixie Downs when my parents rented and then rented to own our first home. And a lot of what I've learned in therapy, and I'm not a professional here, so this is what I've analyzed, what I've been told, is that my dad worked a lot of hours. Like, he worked 10 to 12-hour days to make ends meet and to support me and my mom. And my mom also struggled being here and was new, like, to this community, right? And so us three, for the first 5 years of my life, were in this little bubble. Like, we survived within our home and really became codependent on each other. Like, I remember my mom even telling me that I had a really hard time in kindergarten. When they dropped me off, I would just cry and cry. In that first week, I was really anxious about it. And I don't know, there was just, I don't remember a lot of it, but we just had each other and we were each other's everything. When I finally went to kindergarten at 6, that is when I learned English. There was a really special teacher, Mrs. Goodman, who took some time from her busy schedule to work with me and teach me English and teach me everything that I know. And I don't remember being part of ESL, English as a Second Language, like with other kids. I just remember her and I working one-on-one together, and I don't know if that was on purpose or if that's all I remember, but she really took extra time with me, and she also helped my mom to help me. So now looking back, after I have my ADHD diagnosis at 28, I remember when I was little, English was so hard for me. I just could not spell to save my life, and I would just cry and cry. And Mrs. Goodman had helped my mom with some exercise on how to help me with the spelling quizzes that we'd have. And I don't know if this is 6, 7, or 8 years old. Like, when I reference 6 years old, or this time in my life, it's 6, 7, and 8 really that is pivotal. But whenever it was that in school that we were learning how to write, my mom would write down all the words that we needed to learn for that week on a piece of paper and have me copy them over and over and over again until I would get it. And I remember it was so hard and so exhausting, and I would cry and just tell my mom, no, I'm not going to get it. No, this is too hard. And even though my mom didn't know English at the time, and she was just literally copying the words letter by letter because she didn't know what they meant or what they said. She would say, "You can do it. You can do it. Queriendo puede," which basically means if you want it, you'll get it. If you want it, you can. And she would coach me through it and get me through it. And same with Mrs. Goodman. So with their help, I learned English pretty quickly. And I became the family secretary. My dad would call me his little secretary because I would translate for anyone. The office would call me and I would translate for kids and their parents. My dad needed to go pick up a check because he would do yard work on the weekends, and I would be there to translate and explain what was going on. There's a very specific scenario where my mom had to go to the hospital and I was there translating, and this was before the hospital would offer translators and before now they regulate that a lot, but back then it was just me, so I would translate. It's a skill that Mrs. Goodman again really had honed in to me at an early age, where she said, because I had a hard time. I had a really hard time because I felt different and I didn't want to be different, and English was really hard. And I remember her very specifically saying, "Melissa, it's a great thing that you're bilingual. It's wonderful. You bring the value of two people. When you grow up and you go to work and you can speak English and Spanish, you're bringing value of two people to their business. And you need to own that, and you need to take that and use it and keep practicing both languages. It's very important." And yeah, I did that from the very beginning. And I think that's really where the codependency kicks in, is that we're all in this together. All of us were working towards protecting ourselves, towards everyone being happy and okay. And my parents are doing everything they could to make ends meet. In order for a codependent relationship to work, is you have to all be working towards a common goal. And that was our goal, is just to survive and just to be okay in this world, in this community. We all just leaned on each other. And so I grew up really fast. But I loved it too. I was a kind of kid at 6, 7, 8 years old. I'd want to sit at the table with the adults and just listen to them speak. I just wanted to hear what they had to say, and my mom would just be like, "These are conversations for adults. You can stay here, but you can't speak." So it was imperative that I sat there and just listened, and I loved it. It was like heaven for me, and I don't know why, but I really enjoyed hearing other people's stories and feeling like a little adult. I just felt like a little adult. Then there was a specific situation that was huge for me where I realized how different we were. Again, I remember this at 6 years old, but it could be 6, 7. I'm not sure. My dad and I walked from our home on Dixie Downs down to the Linds. And back then, there was a little spot where there was newspapers for free. You can grab them. And so we were walking to Linds and waiting at that newspaper stand. And all of a sudden, this truck revs its engine and books it to us and just stops right behind us, because our back was to the road. Stops right behind us and says, "Go back to where you fucking came from." And I remember like being shocked, like just jumping and not even really turning around really quickly, but just being shocked. And I turn around just quick enough to see the anger on his face and the last of what he was saying. And then luckily he just sped off, just booked it out of there. And my dad and I were just shocked. And I remember we looked at each other and he was like, and he said, "What did he say?" And that was hard. I think that was harder than even him telling me to go back to where I came from. I was looking at my dad and him asking me what he said, which I think he knew that you can't translate the energy and the anger that man had. But yeah, there's nothing more feeling othered than that. And yeah, I think that I say this to my significant other all the time, that I think that's where I became a liar. And not a liar, that's a harsh word, but you don't want to translate that to your loved one. You don't want to say that. And so I think I said something like, "Oh yeah, he just said that we need to go back to Mexico," or something. And my dad was like, "Oh, just forget about it. Don't worry about it," or something. But that has stuck to me because it was huge. I learned how to soften things for other people, and I learned how to absorb that kind of energy and not try to hurt anyone else with it. And that's not to say this community wasn't great to me, because I had plenty of friends whose parents took me in, especially of the majority. There's a lot of them that were very kind to me. But this community, we were definitely a minority. And That's something that I really want to talk about, and how important it is that if you are somebody that grew up translating for your parents from a very young age, that is a huge asset and a huge tool that we can use, and I did use for many years in my career, was the ability to translate and listen. Even if you're not translating, right? The ability to take the information that somebody says to you in English, you listen, you comprehend, you listen to understand, because you need to understand as much as you possibly can to digest it, translate it, and then deliver it to your parents or whoever it is that you're delivering it to. And again, listen thoroughly, listen intently, understand what they're saying, take it in, and translate it back. I've been in business. I was in management for 7 years, and that is a skill that not a lot of people have, and something that has carried me through my career is the ability to listen, and translation really gives you that skill, for better or for worse. Obviously, that scenario was absolutely traumatic and very difficult to deal with and process. I did that. And then on the flip side, obviously there's good parts, and then on the flip side, you also manage people's feelings, which is what also drives you into codependency, right? And triangulation is that instead of telling my dad, go back to where you effing came from, that guy said, I softened it. I said it in a way that I felt would be better for him to hear. And, that's in a way omission, lying by omission, in a way not giving the other person the opportunity to decide what they want to do for themselves. And not in that specific situation, obviously, that's different, but you grow up, and I did that for my mom. I would soften the blow for things, or I would say things in a way that I knew would help her regulate her emotions, and therefore took on those emotions for her. And for my dad too, but mainly for my mom. And then I remember very distinctly, my dad and I were driving in his little pickup truck. It's a little 2-door Toyota. I don't even think they make them anymore. We were driving home, and on the radio, they were talking about Oscar de la Hoya and how he was very proud of his culture and where his roots were from. And he was Hispanic. And they said Hispanic or something. And I remember turning to my dad and saying, so are we Hispanic? Are we Mexican? And it sounds crazy, obviously, because you feel like, okay, as a kid, maybe you're different, but I'd never been to Mexico at that point. I was never sat down and had a conversation yeah, you are Mexican. This is where you're from. In that moment when I asked, my dad said, yeah, you're Mexican. And that's where your family's from. And we're going to go visit them. I think that was that year or the next year that we went to Mexico for the first time. And I still remember it. I can see it in my mind right now. Us driving down Dixie Downs going home and hearing that and being like, whoa. And then the next year we go to Mexico, and I'm like, okay, yeah, this is where I belong. This is where my people are going to be. It's going to be wonderful because that's where I'm from. And I go to Mexico, and everyone's as nice as they can be, of course. But this is the first time that my parents are going in 7 or 8 years at this point, maybe even a little longer. They're in cloud 9 to be back into their homeland, and I am the little cousin from Los Estados Unidos. I am the cousin with the weird Spanish. And again, here I am, othered. Where I'm supposed to be from. This is where my people are from. I'm supposed to be part of this, and I'm just immediately not the same. And so here I am in the United States, othered and different and not part of the majority, and I'm going to Mexico, and again, I'm not one of them either. I'm different. And that was really hard. There's a scene in the movie Selena, I know a lot of you will know it, where they're trying to convince their father to go to Mexico to perform. And he talks about how exhausting it is to be Mexican American because you have to be more American than Americans and more Mexican than Mexicans all at the same time. And it's exhausting. You have to like Cristina and Oprah, Frank Sinatra and Vicente Fernandez. And it really is exhausting. You're just trying your best to stay afloat on both sides of the coin. And there's very little room to really try to figure out who you are. I don't know if a lot of you will feel that way, but I know I've talked to some people that have felt that way, and that's just context to maybe the struggle of finding identity and the struggle of finding who I was in all of this. But again, all of this made me who I am today, but also made me have thick skin and made me work hard to try to fit in both places. And I think that's also where my people pleasing tendencies came from, because I so desperately wanted to fit in both areas, both parties, and you quickly pick up on things that people like in both areas, right? All my white friends in St. George, Utah, what they loved, and I would try to get into that so that I could fit in there. And then I would go to Mexico and hear what all my cousins liked and the music they listened to and what they were going through in school, and kind of try to model that and agree with that, and just try to do enough to make people like you, to let you in for a second. So I grew up, every other year we'd go back to Mexico, and that was our big vacation for the year. For the rest of the year, we really wouldn't do anything. We'd just live our day-to-day lives and go to Mexico every other year. Emily was born when I was 6, and I was so jealous. I was such a sad little girl that thought my mom would not love me anymore because she has another baby and she's cuter. And but Emily and I had a beautiful relationship, I think, because I was older and she was a friend that I could have always, and she did everything with me. I remember her always being there. We were obsessed with the Jonas Brothers together, and my mom would dress us in the same outfits, and she's still a little sister and we'd still bicker, and that was still a thing. But yeah, I got over the jealousy really quick. But I remember my mom told me a story that I would crawl under her crib and say, and cry and just say, "You don't love me anymore." But those are my elementary school years. My dad continued working on the weekends. We'd go with him to landscaping. And then, so I learned really early on that hard work was necessary, and that, I don't know, you just learn to have empathy really young too, because you have to put yourself in your parents' shoes pretty early on. Like, you have to know, my dad is working 10, 11-hour days, and he comes home and he's exhausted. And then on the weekends, he goes and works and takes care of these people's yards all day too. And then we finally get to rest on Sunday, and then Monday do it all over again. And I don't know, you just have tremendous empathy. And then also learn how to really protect that. Protect the people you love and be really loyal to each other. And we were a tight unit. I would say I grew up and I worked really hard in school. I did really well. I joined debate. Loved that. That was one of the first times that I was part of something bigger than myself. Because part of that survival mode, you're just like narrow-minded almost. Like, you're just thinking, hey, until the next day or the next week, and that's pretty much it. And then debate allowed me to open that up and be like, oh my gosh, I'm part of a team, and we have all these tournaments coming up, and I have to be prepared and have to think in advance. And we got to travel the state. I'd never traveled the state before. We barely left St. George. We just went to Mexico. I would go all over and meet new people, have a great time, and also learn how to speak my mind in a way that mattered, and have fun and have a good time. And then another great pivotal time in my life was a lot of honors English classes that I had in school. I adored Mrs. Jardine, Mrs. Taylor. They were huge in my development. They taught us how to think critically. I remember we had a section called Connection section, where we would read a book or read a passage or whatever it was, and we had to make 2 or 3 connections to each one. And so it would make it so that we would read a book and then we had to connect it to something in real life. And that was huge. I still use that to this day, where you're reading really with intention and you're reading to think about it and really apply it to your life. I think that also helped with the empathy too, is just you read a book and you can look at somebody's situation and put yourself in their shoes for a second and then say, you know what, there's a lot of parallels of that in my life too, and I'm not alone, and this is okay. And those English classes were wonderful. And in high school, I would say that I had a group of friends that were like all kind of misfits. We all just clung together. We were from a bunch of different little cliques. I was friends with theater kids, skater kids, nerdy kids, really smart kids, smarter than me. Like, one of my friends in high school made 3D printers in high school. Some of the people that I hung out with in debate went on to go to Harvard, and brilliant people. It was just a great group. And there, I would say, I also started feeling more connected to my family in Mexico too, because it was a time of MSN is it MSN Messenger or MSN Live, where you could chat. So I could chat to my cousins in Mexico and build more of a relationship before going. And that was really great. Facebook came about, and so we could feel more connected that way. So I did start to feel a little bit more connected with people around me and myself even. Had some hobbies, whatnot. I also, from the 16, 17, and 18, I worked at Bear Paw for a while as a busser, and then I worked at Cafe Rio as a cashier, and that was great because I could develop a lot of customer service skills, meet new people again. And then, what else happened? Then you get to the age where you're graduating, and now all these things that were working for me, all these safeguards that I put for myself to thrive and get praise and get validation from, are gone. And I have to think about college, and I have to think about how to pay for college, and I have to think about what am I going to do with my life. And right out of high school, I got a job with a telecommunication company that was awesome. Luisa and her husband Mike were nice enough to find me at Cafe Rio, and they said, hey, we really think you do really well in the sales environment, you should apply. I was like, no, it's okay, like I have to figure out what I'm doing with college, yada yada, whatever. And she insisted and actually had her manager come to Cafe Rio incognito to interview me. And again, all those skills that I learned as a kid really helped me out, because I noticed that he had a name tag with the image of that telecommunication company. And so I struck up a conversation with him and talked to him about Luisa. And he called me and said, hey, that was your first interview and you did great. You passed with flying colors. I want you to come in and formally interview. And I did, and it really changed my life. It was a company that valued training at the time. I remember she called me and she said, okay, you're going to make, I think it was like $55,000 a year. As an 18-year-old who had never seen more than a little bit over minimum wage at Cafe Rio, I was like, what is this? And remember, this is somebody who, I didn't know much about scholarships. I didn't really have anyone else that went to college. My dad has a 6th grade education. My mom had a 7th or 8th grade education. Like, they really had to pick education and helping their families, and they had a tough choice in that themselves. And so I knew nothing about college, and all I knew was that it was like $5,000 to go to school, and here is a telecommunication company offering me that money to be able to pay for school. So I said, yes, please. And they sent me up to Salt Lake for a whole month to train, crash course on customer service and how to sell, how to manage, how to be a better person. Like, not a better person, but a structured person, a functioning person in society. And I don't think they do that anymore. At least I'm pretty sure they don't, because when I left, they were not doing that. But I was lucky enough to be there enough time when they did. And that was pivotal for me, and I loved it. So, I started with this company. Very quickly, I found my niche. Very quickly, I realized that I could apply a lot of the things that I learned as a kid with translating and listening to understand and uncovering the needs of the client and pairing it to products that would help them. Those behaviors were nourished and developed, and a year in, I was offered a promotion to become an assistant sales manager, and I moved up to Salt Lake. And then I was an assistant manager for quite a few stores, and then finally had the opportunity to become a store manager and move back to St. George. I've learned so much through that, and it was pivotal in my life. But it was also, I gave up a lot of myself for that job, because I didn't know what my values were. I didn't know what was most important to me. All I knew was, like, give it your all, work really hard. And I sacrificed a lot of myself just to be successful, which at the time was just making money. And in that time frame, I neglected a lot. I stopped going to school. I got pretty much my associate's degree, and then I'm like, now at this moment, I'm like 3 or 4 classes away from getting my bachelor's degree. That telecommunication company offered to pay for it, but I just became my dad. I worked 10-hour days for a company that, yeah, they did give me a lot of value, but I was, again, really narrow-minded. That's what I knew to do. I didn't have any hobbies during that time frame. I was a shitty friend. I lost communication with a lot of really good people. I gained a bunch of weight, and which weight fluctuation has always been a thing for me, but I just stopped taking care of my body. I wouldn't eat meals. I would have a big old thing of 4 or 5 shots of espresso, like a revolver, I think is what it's called, from Beans and Brews, every day on an empty stomach, which is horrible. Now I know. I sacrificed a lot of myself because I just didn't know who I was. And the things that worked growing up and in high school no longer worked. People pleasing wasn't serving me. Trying to fit in and get people to like me just for the sake of liking me wasn't fulfilling. I didn't have strong, really close friendships because I wasn't being honest with anyone or even myself. And that was all on me. And that really all came to a head when I was 28, and so much happened. I got divorced. I started seriously going to therapy like once a week, and I got an ADHD diagnosis, which made so much sense as to why I was struggling with so many things. When I was 28, I also switched careers because the telecommunication company that I was working for decided to close all of their rural locations, and St. George, Utah was one of them. So then I decided to pivot. I switched careers and I went and did paralegal work because I said, maybe I can go to law school. Let me go into the field and see what that would look like. I go do paralegal work, and it was very quickly that I felt like I was the dumbest person ever because I could not sit. This was the first time at 28 years old that I had to sit at a computer for 8 hours straight, and I was losing my mind. With the telecommunication company, I was running a corporate location, and they were gracious enough to allow us to run those locations like our own business. So I was constantly moving. I was helping customers. I was helping my representatives. I was doing inventory. I was going out into the community and trying to get our name out there. I was constantly doing different things. So then I go to paralegal work and I'm at a computer for 8 hours a day, and I was just like, I know I can do this. I know I can do this. I know I'm smart enough to do this, but reading this page of medical records is going to be the death of me. And I didn't have any systems. I had no idea that I had ADHD. So when I got that diagnosis, oh my gosh, I remember I cried because a lot of the things that I read in that book that they gave me made sense. And I was diagnosed by 2 therapists and my family physician. So I got 3 diagnoses just to confirm, because I was like, no, there's a lot of self-diagnosing going on out there. But no, sure enough, definitely. And women, a lot of women go undiagnosed for a long time because our symptoms show up very different from the ones that people think of, which is hyperactivity and just being really rambunctious and all those stereotypical, which are very true for certain people, but for women, hyperfixation and severe people pleasing and always being busy but not really doing anything. There's just a lot of symptoms that I had, and one day I'll have an ADHD episode that we can dive into, and I can read some captions from the books that I read. But anyway, yeah, I finally started working really hard on myself instead of working really hard on everyone else and for everyone else, and finally found myself and finally started working on hobbies and having my own value system and writing them down. I grew up Catholic, and so you're just like, yeah, I believe in all those commandments, and that's fine. But it's different than being told what your values are and trying to live it on a day-to-day basis, than writing them down and really analyzing your life and saying, okay, all the decisions that I make in my life, do they align with the things that I believe? Do they align with my values? It's a game changer when you start doing that. And I didn't start doing that until I was 28. And so, yeah, I also look back and realize like how stressed I was all the time. My body was just so stressed. And anyway, so that's why I really want to do Hermanas and have this space, because just like my mom and Mrs. Goodman and Mrs. Jardine and some family members in Mexico, women that really took me under their wing to give me advice, people at the telecommunication company that I worked at. There's so many people that taught me so much, and I want to pay it forward. I want more people to learn these things faster. We're going to do that here. We're going to do that with all the guests that we have, and I'm learning still. I'm always learning. We're all going to be always learning together. And I hope that you enjoy it and maybe understand me a little bit more. I know I went through it really fast, but we will go into more depth as we go. And yeah, thank you for being here. Next, we're going to have Stephanie back on because we finished too abruptly with her session. We still have to talk about her fitness journey and her birth story. We have some really special guests lined up. I don't want to give it too much away, but please stay tuned. And if you have any questions for me, anything that resonated with you, please just put it in the comments and we'll address it as episodes go on. I really do want to have a lot more solo sessions because I want to word vomit all the things that I've learned that I wish I'd learned sooner. And that's a big point too to make. In the video that I made for the preview on this one, I did talk about how I wanted little Melissas to find information and resource with hermanas, and that is true. But little is, I don't mean like a little child looking up, hey, how to handle corporate America. That's not what I'm saying. But I hope that we can be a resource for everybody, and I want to be like a Mrs. Goodman for somebody else. And if I can do that and pay my dues, I would love to. Anyway, love you guys. Bye.